The fluorescent lights in the pharmacy hummed softly above the polished floor. A little black girl stood at the counter, her small fingers trembling as she placed a handful of worn copper pennies on the cold surface. Each coin clinked gently, a fragile rhythm against the quiet buzz of the store. She was no taller than the counter itself, her hair tied into uneven braids, her backpack torn at the strap. "Sir, I just need one bottle. My brother cannot breathe," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper but sharp enough to cut through the indifference in the air. The pharmacist hesitated, glancing toward the man beside her. He was tall, well-dressed, his watch gleaming like a small sun beneath the fluorescent lights. He had been waiting to pick up his prescription, scrolling through his phone, his expression distant. Now, he lifted his eyes and looked down at the girl. "You are holding up the line," he said coldly. His tone carried the weight of habit, the kind that comes from years of being obeyed without question. The girl's dark eyes flickered, not with anger but with something deeper resolve. "I am sorry, mister," she whispered, "but I counted twice. It is $1 short." She opened her palm, showing a crumpled note and a few more coins. The man sighed, shaking his head. "You cannot even afford cough medicine. Maybe you should not be here." A couple behind him chuckled under their breath. The cashier shifted awkwardly, unsure whether to speak. The little girl did not flinch. She gathered the coins again, counted slowly, whispering each number to herself. 1, 2, 3, 4. The sound filled the silence like a heartbeat. "My brother is 4, she said suddenly, as if explaining why she could not leave. "He cannot stop coughing. Mama said the medicine with the blue label works best." Her voice cracked, but she kept counting. The billionaire watched her, the corners of his phone screen reflected in his eyes. For the first time, he lowered it. Something in her tone, the steadiness, the absence of begging, pulled at a place inside him he had long forgotten. The pharmacist cleared his throat, ready to dismiss her, but the man spoke first. "That is enough," he said sharply. "People like her do this all the time." The girl froze, her fingers curled around the last penny. "People like me," she repeated quietly. Then she looked up. Her gaze was not defiant, just unbearably honest. "People who try." The words hung in the air, soft but immovable. The man felt something shift, a small, unfamiliar ache behind his ribs. The sound of her pennies echoed again as she gently pushed them across the counter, each one glinting in the light like a tiny act of faith. The cashier stared, unsure what to do next. The man looked at her hand, the faint tremor, the chipped nail polish the color of sky blue. For a moment, everything else, the perfume of the woman behind him, the buzz of the lights, the noise of the city beyond the glass door fell away. Only the quiet sound of coins remained. And in that silence, he felt it the faint beginning of shame. The hum of the pharmacy's refrigerator filled the silence that followed. The little black girl stood still, her eyes fixed on the counter where the coins lay scattered. The billionaire, whose name was Nathaniel Royce, adjusted his cufflinks and exhaled through his nose, as if trying to shake off the unease that had crept into him. The cashier, a young man in a blue vest, cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Sweetheart, you cannot buy this medicine if you do not have enough. You will have to come back with the rest," he said gently but firmly. Nathaniel nodded as if to approve, his tone detached. "Rules are rules." He turned slightly, ready to leave, but something in the girl's stillness stopped him. She did not cry or plead. Instead, she gathered her coins with care, placing each one back into a tiny cloth pouch. The pouch was faded pink, with a small heart stitched by hand. She whispered to herself as she counted again, perhaps a habit learned from her mother, a quiet way of keeping hope steady. "I will come back tomorrow," she said softly. Maybe someone dropped a coin on the street. The man behind her scoffed. "You should teach that child not to waste people's time," he muttered to his wife. The woman nodded, clutching her designer purse tighter. Nathaniel looked at them, then back at the girl. He wanted to agree with them, to walk away and forget, but he could not. There was something disarmingly composed about her. "What is your name?" he asked suddenly. She hesitated before answering. "Lila." The word came out small but sure. "Lila what?" he pressed, perhaps out of habit, as though he was in one of his board meetings. "Just Lila," she said, looking up at him with calm eyes. He almost smiled, but the moment passed. "Well, "Lila, people do not always get what they want," he said, trying to sound instructive, like a teacher giving a life lesson. She nodded once. "I know, but sometimes people still try." The sentence landed like a quiet arrow. Nathaniel had built his empire on the idea that effort was everything. Yet hearing it from a child made the words feel heavier, less convenient. He turned away again, uncomfortable with the way her voice lingered in his mind. "Sir," the cashier said awkwardly, "you left your prescription." Nathaniel blinked, realizing he had forgotten what he came for. He took the white paper bag from the counter, then paused. The girl was already at the door, her small frame outlined by the red and blue glow of the open sign. Her shoes squeaked against the tile as she stepped out into the rain. She pulled her thin hoodie tighter, coins clinking faintly in her pocket. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He was not supposed to care. He had learned long ago to tune out the world's little tragedies. They were endless, and he had business to attend to. But that night, when he sat in the back seat of his black sedan, the sound of the rain on the roof seemed to mimic the rhythm of those falling coins. His driver, an older man named Harris, glanced at him through the mirror. "Everything all right, sir?" Nathaniel did not answer immediately. "Just drive." As they pulled away, he looked back once. Through the glass, he could still see her walking along the sidewalk, head down, hugging the medicine bag that did not exist yet. He closed his eyes. The next morning came with gray clouds and the chill of early spring. Nathaniel's schedule was already full. A breakfast meeting with investors, a call with the board, and a charity gala in the evening. Yet, as he sipped his coffee, an image kept returning the girl's hands, the way she lined up her pennies with quiet precision. By mid-afternoon, he found himself driving past the same pharmacy. He told himself it was coincidence, that he simply wanted to pick up vitamins. But when he parked, he saw her again. Lila was standing by the trash can near the entrance, her pouch open, sorting through a handful of coins. The pharmacist came out, holding a broom. "Little girl, you cannot stay here all day," he said kindly. "Go home." Lila looked up. "I will, after I find one more dime." Nathaniel stepped out of his car, his shoes splashing against the puddles. The wind carried the smell of wet asphalt and spring rain. "You again," he said, more to himself than to her. She looked at him and nodded politely. "Yes, mister. I came back like I said." He glanced at her pouch, then at her small hands, trembling slightly from the cold. "You are still short," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I am close." There was no shame in her tone, only quiet determination. The cashier from yesterday appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "She has been here since morning," he told Nathaniel. "I tried to tell her to go, but she will not leave until she can pay for it." Nathaniel looked at the bottle of cough syrup inside the store window, the same blue label she had mentioned. For a moment, he imagined his own childhood a small apartment, his mother counting bills by candlelight. The memory stung, uninvited. "Do you want me to buy it for you?" he asked finally. Lila shook her head instantly. "No, mister. I want to do it myself." Her answer was firm but gentle, like a lesson wrapped in innocence. Nathaniel stared at her for a long second, then exhaled. "Suit yourself," he said, though his voice had softened. As he turned to leave, he caught his reflection in the glass door, an expensive suit, a face untouched by struggle, and for the first time, it looked strange to him. Behind that reflection, Lila bent down again, searching the wet ground with her tiny fingers. One coin glinted under the light, and when she picked it up, she smiled as if she had just found the whole world. Nathaniel stood frozen, realizing he was the only one watching. The sound of the coins came again, small and steady, echoing in the hollow space of his conscience. The rain had stopped by evening, leaving the air heavy with the smell of damp asphalt and blooming lilacs from the planters along the sidewalk. The sky was bruised purple, the city lights beginning to shimmer through the mist. Nathaniel Roy stood across the street from the pharmacy again, the same one he had visited 2 nights in a row. He told himself he was only passing by, yet his steps slowed until he found himself staring through the glass window. Inside, Lila stood at the counter, her small figure dwarfed by the shelves of cold medicine and vitamins behind her. The cashier leaned down, speaking softly, and for a moment Nathaniel thought the man was sending her away again. But then he saw Lila hold out her pink cloth pouch, her eyes shining with triumph. She had found the last dime. She placed her coins carefully on the counter, lining them in neat rows, and whispered something that made the cashier's expression soften. Nathaniel could not hear her words, but he saw the man nod and reach for a small bottle with a blue label. Lila's hands shook as she took it, holding it as though it were something sacred. She thanked the cashier, her voice lost beneath the soft chime of the door as she stepped outside. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing, though he could not say why. She turned and saw him then, standing by the lamppost. For a heartbeat, neither moved. "You got it," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Lila nodded, clutching the bag to her chest. "I told you I would," she said simply. Her hair was damp, sticking to her forehead, but her smile was calm, unshaken. Nathaniel felt a flicker of embarrassment. The memory of his cold words from before pressed against his chest like a weight. "Your brother," he asked carefully, "is he feeling any better?" She shook her head. "Not yet. Mama said the fever is worse today. But maybe this will help." She lifted the small bag as proof of her hope. Nathaniel glanced toward the end of the block where the bus stop sign flickered weakly. "How far is your home?" he asked. "Not far," she said. "Across the bridge, near the old train yard." He frowned. That was on the rough side of the city, where streetlights flickered out more often than they worked. "That is not close," he said. "It is, if you walk fast," she replied. The matter-of-fact tone caught him off guard. "Do you always walk alone?" he asked. Lila nodded. "Mama says brave people walk even when it is dark." Nathaniel felt something twist inside him, something he had not felt in years. He looked at his car parked at the curb, the driver waiting patiently. "For reasons he could not name," he said, "I will take you home." Lila hesitated, her eyes narrowing with suspicion that came not from fear, but from experience. "You do not have to," she said. "I can go by myself." "I know I do not have to," Nathaniel said quietly. "But I want to." She studied him for a long second before nodding. "Okay, but only to the bridge." Her boundaries were clear, and he respected that. They crossed the street together, the sound of their footsteps mixing with the hiss of distant tires on wet pavement. Harris, the driver, looked surprised when Nathaniel opened the car door for her. "Everything all right, sir?" he asked. Nathaniel nodded. "Just give us a ride to the bridge." Lila climbed into the back seat, her small frame sinking into the leather cushions that seemed to swallow her whole. She ran her fingers along the stitching, eyes wide. "It smells like flowers," she said softly. Nathaniel smiled faintly. "Lavender," he replied. "My housekeeper uses it." "It is nice," she said, settling the medicine bag on her lap. As they drove, the city shifted from bright storefronts to crumbling brick buildings, their windows patched with cardboard. Lila watched the scenery with quiet interest, as if memorizing every detail. "Do you go to school?" Nathaniel asked. She nodded. "Sometimes. When Mama feels strong enough to walk me." "Do you like it?" he asked. "I love it," she said instantly. "I want to be a nurse. Nurses fix people." The words were so certain that he could almost see the future she imagined for herself: white shoes, steady hands, and a kind smile. "That is a good dream," he said. "Dreams do not fix people," she answered softly. "Doing does." Her answer silenced him. They reached the bridge sooner than he expected. It was old, its metal railings covered in rust and graffiti. Lila thanked him politely and opened the door before he could respond. "Be careful," he said. She turned back, her eyes catching the glow of the street lamp. "You too, mister." Then she ran across the bridge, her shoes slapping softly against the wet pavement, the small pink pouch bouncing at her side. Nathaniel sat in the car, watching until she disappeared into the darkness beyond the curve of the road. Harris glanced at him in the mirror. "Do you want me to follow her, sir?" Nathaniel hesitated, then shook his head. "No, go home." But even as the car moved away, he could not shake the image of her vanishing figure, a flicker of light swallowed by the city's shadow. He leaned back, the hum of the tires blending with the distant echo of her words. "Dreams do not fix people, doing does." By the time he reached his penthouse, the phrase had carved itself deep inside him, like a quiet truth he could no longer ignore. The next afternoon, the clouds had broken apart, and sunlight streamed weakly through the high glass windows of Nathaniel Royce's office. He was supposed to be in a meeting, but the conversation about quarterly profits felt hollow. The city below shimmered, indifferent to everything except its own rhythm. Numbers on the screen blurred before his eyes, replaced by the image of a little girl crossing a rusted bridge with a pink cloth pouch and a bottle of medicine clutched to her chest. He shut his laptop and stood. "Cancel my evening appointments," he told his assistant. Her brows rose, but she nodded. By the time Nathaniel stepped out of the elevator, the late afternoon light had turned gold. He did not know what he was planning to do, only that he needed to see for himself if Lila had made it home safely. The drive toward the old train yard took him past streets he had not seen in decades, since before his fortune. The buildings were small and tired, their paint peeling like old memories. The closer he got, the more potholes lined the road, forcing his car to slow. When he reached the bridge, the air smelled faintly of oil and river water. Harris hesitated at the curb. "Sir, this is not a good neighborhood," he said carefully. Nathaniel nodded. "I will not be long." He stepped out, his polished shoes clicking awkwardly against the cracked sidewalk. A group of children ran past, their laughter mixing with the distant rattle of a passing train. Following Lila's directions from the night before, he crossed the bridge and turned down a narrow street that sloped toward a cluster of old brick buildings. Some windows were covered with plywood, others with plastic sheets flapping in the wind. He stopped when he saw a door painted blue, its color faded but still hopeful. A small wind chime hung beside it, tinkling softly. He knocked gently. There was no answer at first. Then, the door opened a few inches, revealing Lila's face. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Mister?" she asked, her voice uncertain. Nathaniel offered a small smile. "I just wanted to make sure you got home all right." She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. "Mama is sick," she whispered. "She is resting." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "I will not stay long," he said. "I just wanted to check." Lila opened the door wider, enough for him to see the small room behind her. The air was warm and faintly smoky from a candle on the table. A blanket hung over the window to keep out the draft. On the floor near the wall sat a mattress covered with a faded quilt. A woman lay there, her breathing shallow but steady. "Mama, this is the man I told you about," Lila said softly. The woman stirred, turning her head. Her skin was pale, her hair disheveled, but her eyes, when they met Nathaniel's, were gentle and wary. "You helped her?" she asked weakly. Nathaniel nodded. "She helped herself," he said. "I just happened to be there." The woman smiled faintly. "She always tries," she murmured. Lila knelt beside her mother and adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. "I got the medicine," she said. "You will feel better soon." Her mother's hand reached out to touch her cheek. "You did good, baby." Nathaniel felt something tighten in his chest. He looked around the small apartment, the peeling wallpaper, the cracked sink, the cold tile floor, and wondered how many people lived unseen like this, quietly surviving between paydays and promises. "Is there anything you need?" he asked. Lila looked up. "We are okay," she said politely. Then, after a pause, she added, "The rent is late, but Mama said it will be fine." Nathaniel knew that tone. It was the same one he had used when he was a boy, pretending not to worry his own mother. He reached into his coat pocket and took out an envelope, but Lila shook her head. "Please, mister," she said softly. "We do not take money from strangers." He hesitated. "Then maybe I can bring groceries," he suggested. "It is not money. It is food." Lila considered, then nodded slowly. "Maybe milk. Elijah likes milk when his throat hurts." "Elijah?" Nathaniel asked. "My brother," she said, pointing to the corner where a small crib stood, patched together from wood and cloth. A baby boy slept inside, his breathing uneven but calm. Nathaniel walked closer, careful not to make a sound. The baby stirred, one tiny hand curling into a fist. "He looks strong," Nathaniel said. "He is," Lila replied proudly. "He just gets sick sometimes." Nathaniel turned to her mother. "I will bring some things tomorrow," he said gently. "It will not be charity. It will be a thank you for reminding me what effort looks like." The woman looked puzzled, but too tired to question him. She closed her eyes again, murmuring a quiet thank you. Lila followed Nathaniel to the door. The hallway smelled of dust and old wood. "You really do not have to," she said. "People promise things and forget." Nathaniel looked down at her. "I do not forget," he said simply. She studied him for a moment, then gave a small smile. "Okay," she said. "We will see." When he stepped outside, the sun had dipped below the rooftops, leaving the sky streaked with amber and gray. The sound of a train echoed nearby, and somewhere a dog barked. Nathaniel stood still for a long moment, the wind tugging at his coat. For years, he had measured value in contracts, numbers, and signatures. But now, standing in front of a blue door in a forgotten street, he realized that worth could look like something far quieter: a child counting coins under flickering light, a family surviving on courage, a promise that might finally mean something. The next morning, sunlight crept through the cracks of the blinds in Nathaniel's penthouse, spilling across the marble floor and the polished glass table. He had not slept well. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the blue door, the little wind chime, and the girl's steady gaze as she said, "People promise things and forget." He had promised not to forget, and for once, he meant it. By 7 o'clock, he was already dressed, standing in his kitchen, staring at a shopping list he had written himself. The words were simple: milk, bread, fruit, diapers, medicine, baby wipes, but they carried more weight than the billion-dollar decisions he made every day. Harris entered quietly, surprised to see his employer awake and holding grocery bags. "Are we going somewhere, sir?" he asked cautiously. Nathaniel nodded. "To the bridge." Then beyond it. The drive was quiet except for the rustle of paper bags and the soft hum of the engine. The morning air was crisp, and the sunlight turned the river into a sheet of gold as they crossed the bridge. When the car stopped in front of the old building, Nathaniel stepped out, holding the bags himself. A woman sweeping the sidewalk looked up, startled by the sight of a man in a tailored suit carrying groceries. "You lost, mister?" she called out. "No," he said with a small smile. "I think I am exactly where I need to be." The blue door creaked open before he could knock. Lila stood there, barefoot, her hair in braids that had come loose overnight. She blinked up at him, squinting against the light. "You came back," she said, sounding both surprised and cautious. Nathaniel nodded. "I said I would." He held up the bags. "Groceries. For you, your mama, and Elijah." Lila stepped aside and let him in. The small apartment looked the same as before, but the air smelled faintly of broth and lavender. Her mother sat up on the mattress, looking stronger than yesterday. "You should not have gone through the trouble," she said. "It was no trouble," Nathaniel replied. "I wanted to." Lila peeked into one of the bags and gasped when she saw a box of cereal shaped like stars. "I always wanted to try this," she whispered. "Mama said it was too expensive." "Then today, you can," Nathaniel said, setting the bags on the table. The sound of laughter from Lila filled the room for the first time, light and pure. Her mother's eyes softened. "She has not laughed like that in a long time," she said quietly. Nathaniel glanced at her, unsure what to say, so he busied himself unpacking the groceries. Lila ran to get a glass, pouring milk carefully, spilling only a little. "Would you like some, mister?" she asked politely. Nathaniel smiled. "Sure, thank you." The milk was warm, slightly sweet, and for a strange moment, it reminded him of simpler days of mornings, when his own mother had stretched every dollar to make breakfast feel like love. He looked at the small family before him, and something inside him shifted, softening edges he did not realize had hardened. "You do not owe me anything," he said finally. "This is not charity." Lila tilted her head. "Then what is it?" she asked. Nathaniel thought for a moment. "A promise kept," he said. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. Her mother smiled faintly, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "You are a kind man, Mr. Royce." The name startled him. "You know who I am?" She nodded. "Lila saw your picture once on the news. You are the man who builds tall buildings." Nathaniel hesitated, unsure whether to feel proud or exposed. "Yes, I build things," he said softly. "But lately, I am not sure what they stand for." Lila looked up, curiosity lighting her face. Maybe you can build something for people who do not have big houses, she suggested. Her words were innocent, but they landed with surprising force. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment, then smiled. Maybe I can. They spent the next hour talking about school, about Elijah's favorite songs, about how Lila liked to draw pictures of houses she would one day design herself. When it was time to leave, Nathaniel placed an envelope on the table, not filled with cash but with a business card. If you ever need anything, he said, you can call this number. It will reach me directly. Lila turned the card over in her hand, tracing the letters. Will you come back? She asked. If you want me to, he replied. She nodded. Then yes. He smiled and walked to the door, but before he stepped out, he felt a tug at his sleeve. Lila was holding something small in her hand, a coin, worn smooth from use. For luck, she said, pressing it into his palm. You might need it. Nathaniel looked at the coin, then at her. I think I already have it, he said. As he left, the sound of the wind chime followed him, soft and clear. Back in the car, Harris glanced at the rearview mirror. Looks like you made some friends, he said. Nathaniel looked down at the coin in his hand. The edges cool against his skin. Not friends, he said quietly. Reminders. When he looked out the window again, the sun had climbed higher, scattering light across the city like a promise kept alive by a little girl counting pennies and a man learning how to see the world all over again. The following morning began with an unusual quiet in Nathaniel's apartment. The city's distant hum still filled the air, but something else pressed into his chest, a faint worry he could not shake. He had planned to stop by the blue door again before heading to his office. The thought had comforted him all night. Yet when his car rolled up to the narrow street by the old bridge, the scene that met him felt wrong. The door was open. The wind chime no longer sang. The sound of distant trains echoed over the empty sidewalk. Nathaniel stepped out slowly, scanning the alley. The woman who swept the pavement yesterday was gone, and the usual hum of morning chatter had vanished too. He knocked lightly, calling Lila's name, but no one answered. Inside, the apartment was cold. The blanket had been folded neatly on the mattress, and the candle on the table had burned down to its base. A single cup sat in the sink, still wet from being rinsed. It looked as if they had left in a hurry, but not in panic, just absence, like a chapter ended without warning. Nathaniel's throat tightened. He turned in a slow circle, his eyes landing on the small pink pouch that had once held her coins. It sat on the table, empty, beside a folded note. He reached for it carefully, afraid the paper might crumble. The handwriting was uneven but deliberate. It read, "Thank you, mister. Mama said we have to go. She said you are kind but busy, and we should not trouble you. We will be okay. Maybe one day I will build that clinic and you can come see it." From Lila. For a moment, Nathaniel could not move. The words blurred, not from time or ink, but from the weight behind them. He folded the note and slipped it into his pocket, his jaw clenched. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying with it the faint smell of rain and rust. Harris watched from the car as Nathaniel stepped back into the street, his face unreadable. "They moved out?" the driver asked gently. Nathaniel nodded once. "Yes, or they were forced to." He glanced around, noticing for the first time the landlord's notice taped near the door, a thin sheet of paper marked, "Vacate." His stomach sank. "They were behind on rent," he murmured. Harris frowned. "Do you want me to ask around?" "No," Nathaniel said, though his voice lacked conviction. "If they wanted me to find them, they would have stayed." He turned to leave but stopped after a few steps. The sound of the wind chime barely hanging by one string clinked weakly behind him. He reached up, untangled it from the nail, and slipped it into his coat pocket. Back in the car, he sat in silence for a long time. The city outside moved as if nothing had changed. Buses sighed at stops. Children ran with backpacks. Stores opened their doors, but inside him, something had. He pulled out the note again, tracing the small, careful letters. "Maybe one day I will build that clinic." The words echoed in his mind. That evening, Nathaniel stood in his office, staring out at the skyline. The city lights shimmered across glass towers, reflections of success that now looked hollow. His reflection stared back at him, older, lonelier. He remembered the way Lila had refused his money, the way she had said, "People promise things, and forget. He had promised, and somehow, he had still failed. His assistant knocked gently. "Sir, your meeting is in 10 minutes, she said. Nathaniel turned toward her, his eyes distant. "Cancel it," he said, "and clear my schedule for the next few days." She blinked, surprised. "Everything, sir?" "Everything," he repeated. When she left, he opened his drawer and placed the wind chime inside, beside the coin Lila had given him. Two small, ordinary things that now held more meaning than any of his awards or contracts. The following day, Nathaniel drove back to the same neighborhood alone. He spoke with the shopkeepers, the crossing guard, the man who sold newspapers. They all remembered Lila. "The little girl with the braids?" the newspaper man said. "Sweet kid. Always said thank you, even when she had no money for a paper. I think they left before dawn. Her mama looked sick." Nathaniel nodded. "Do you know where they went?" The man shook his head. "Said something about her aunt in another part of town, maybe Eastwood." It was not much, but it was enough to keep the spark alive. That night, Nathaniel sat in his study, the city glowing beyond the windows. He reread her note one more time, then unfolded a blank sheet of paper. Slowly, he began to write not as a businessman, but as a man who wanted to keep a promise. "Dear Lila," he wrote, "you said one day you would build a clinic. I think you should, and if you cannot yet, then I will build one in your name until you can." He signed his name at the bottom and stared at the words. They looked right. They felt right. He folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it beside the wind chime. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and rain began to fall again, gentle but steady, the same rhythm as coins on a countertop, counting toward something larger than either of them could yet see. Days passed, but Nathaniel could not rest. Each morning began the same way, with the note unfolded on his desk and the sound of the wind chime faintly ringing whenever the window opened. It was not guilt that drove him anymore. It was something else, an unfinished thread between two worlds that refused to break. On the third day, he decided he would find Lila, not out of pity, but because he owed her more than words written on paper. He called a private investigator, a man who usually tracked down lost assets or missing partners, and handed him the note. "Her name is Lila," Nathaniel said. "She has a little brother named Elijah and a sick mother. They might have gone to stay with an aunt somewhere near Eastwood. Find them." The man glanced at the worn pink pouch Nathaniel had kept as evidence of her existence and nodded. "I will start today." 2 days later, Nathaniel received a call. The investigator had found them, or at least a lead. A nurse at a small community clinic near Eastwood had seen a girl matching Lila's description helping her mother fill out forms for treatment. "They left before I could ask more," the nurse said over the phone, "but she was polite, very smart, and protective of her family. She mentioned she wanted to be a nurse someday." Nathaniel thanked her and wrote down the address. The next morning, he drove there himself. The clinic was modest, its paint faded, and its sign half broken. But the waiting area was warm and filled with people who looked grateful, simply to have a place to sit. He spoke to the receptionist, who smiled kindly. "I remember them. They came 2 nights ago." The little girl kept saying she would pay when she grew up. Nathaniel's chest tightened at those words. "Do you know where they went?" he asked. They were headed toward the shelter across the street. The mother needed rest. Nathaniel crossed the street, the gravel crunching under his shoes. The shelter was a converted church, the doors open, the faint smell of soup drifting into the air. Inside, a few volunteers were cleaning tables, and children played quietly in a corner. He scanned the room until he saw her. Lila sat near the back, reading from a picture book to her brother. The light from a nearby window caught the strands of her braids, making them glow like soft threads of bronze. Her mother was resting on a cot beside them, asleep but peaceful. Nathaniel stood at the entrance for a long time, just watching. When Lila looked up and saw him, her eyes widened, then softened with a small smile of recognition. "Mister," she said, closing the book carefully. "You found us." He walked toward her, unsure of what to say, the words tangled somewhere between apology and relief. "I said I would keep my promise," he said finally. "I just did not expect it would take me this long." Lila stood, clutching the book against her chest. Mama said sometimes promises take the long way home. The simple truth of it hit him harder than any speech could. "How is she?" he asked, nodding toward her mother. "Better," Lila said. The nurse gave her new medicine. Elijah stopped coughing. She pointed proudly at the sleeping boy, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. Nathaniel knelt to look closer, smiling. "He looks strong," he said. "Like someone I know." Lila grinned. "I told you he would be." One of the volunteers, a woman in her 60s, approached with a kind smile. "Are you family?" she asked Nathaniel. He hesitated. "Not by blood," he said quietly, "but maybe something like it." The woman nodded approvingly and left them to talk. Nathaniel reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. "I built something," he said. "It is not finished yet, but I want you to see it." Lila took the envelope carefully, her fingers tracing the edge before opening it. Inside was a printed photo, a new building rising on the edge of downtown, sunlight bouncing off its glass windows. The sign on the front read, "The Lila Hope Community Health Center." She stared at it, her lips parted. "You named it after me?" she asked in disbelief. Nathaniel nodded. "After the person who reminded me what trying really means." Her eyes shimmered, and for a moment she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Mama will not believe this." He smiled. "Then let us tell her together." They walked to her mother's cot, and Lila showed her the picture. The woman blinked, tears welling up as she read the name. "You did not have to do that," she said softly. "I know," Nathaniel said, "but I wanted to." The shelter grew quiet as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting the floor with golden light. Lila placed the photo on the small bedside table and looked up at Nathaniel. "Can I work there one day?" she asked. "When I am old enough?" "You already have a job there," he said. "You are the reason it exists." She smiled wide, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and lit the whole room. For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt something close to peace. When he left the shelter, the wind picked up again, soft and cool, and he heard a faint jingling from inside his coat pocket, the sound of the wind chime he had taken from the blue door. It sang quietly as he walked toward his car, a reminder that some promises, once made, had a way of leading a person exactly where they were meant to go. 1 year later, the city felt different. The glass towers still caught the morning light, the street still buzzed with hurried footsteps, but somewhere between those rhythms, something softer had taken root. The Lila Hope Community Health Center stood proudly on the corner of Oak and Fifth, its white walls clean and bright against the gray skyline. Every morning, its doors opened early, welcoming families, children, and elders who once had nowhere else to go. Inside, the walls were painted warm shades of cream and sky blue. A small wind chime hung near the entrance, ringing whenever someone came through the door. Nathaniel Royce stood in the lobby that morning, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up, watching as a stream of patients filled the waiting room. It was opening day, and everything felt new, yet strangely familiar. The staff moved quickly but with care, nurses checking charts, volunteers handing out coffee, children playing quietly in the reading corner. Nathaniel's gaze settled on the front desk, where a small figure stood on tiptoe, helping organize the sign-in sheets. It was Lila. She was wearing a light blue sweater, and her name badge hung proudly on a string around her neck. Though she was still young, her movements carried purpose. She greeted every person who came in with a smile that warmed even the coldest expression. When she saw Nathaniel, her face lit up. "Mister," she called, running over. "You came early," he smiled. "I would not miss this." She handed him a small paper cup of coffee. "I made it myself. It might taste a little funny." He took a sip and chuckled. "It tastes perfect." The sound of laughter filled the lobby, blending with the chime of the door. Lila's mother sat nearby in a wheelchair, her health now steady, her cheeks fuller, her eyes bright. She waved at Nathaniel. "You really did it," she said softly. "You built this place." Nathaniel looked around, taking in the noise, the movement, the life. "No," he said. "We did." A nurse approached with a clipboard, handing Lila a small stack of papers. "Would you mind helping me file these?" she asked kindly. Lila nodded eagerly. "Of course." She turned back to Nathaniel. "Do you want to see my corner?" He followed her down a hallway lined with framed photos of families and volunteers. On one wall hung a single image of the health center's groundbreaking ceremony. In it, Nathaniel stood beside Lila, both holding shovels in the dirt. Underneath the photo was a plaque that read, "Dedicated to every child who counts hope one coin at a time." Lila pointed proudly, "That is my favorite part." Nathaniel read the words again, the corners of his mouth curving upward. "Mine too." She led him farther down the hall to a small office space with colorful posters and a table covered in drawings. "This is my spot," she said. "I help with the sign-ins, and sometimes I read to the little kids while they wait." He nodded, his chest swelling with quiet pride. "You have done more than most grown-ups, I know." She laughed. "Mama says I talk too much for a volunteer." He smiled. "That might be your best skill." She grinned, pleased by the compliment, then added thoughtfully, "You know, mister, sometimes people come here scared, but when they see everyone smiling, they calm down. I think places can heal hearts even before the doctors do." Nathaniel felt his throat tighten slightly. "I think you are right, Lila." A nurse's voice echoed from the lobby. "Lila, someone wants to meet you." She turned, curious, and hurried back. At the front desk, a little boy stood holding his mother's hand, coughing lightly. His eyes were wide, scared, the same way hers once had been in that pharmacy long ago. Lila crouched down to meet him at eye level. "Hey," she said softly, "you are going to be okay. You are in the right place." The boy nodded slowly, comforted by her tone. She smiled and handed him a small sticker shaped like a star. "Here, this helps brave kids." Nathaniel watched the scene unfold, his heart full. The sound of laughter, the ring of the wind chime, the smell of antiseptic mixed with coffee, it all felt like the beginning of something permanent. When Lila's shift ended that afternoon, she walked outside with Nathaniel. The air was crisp, the sun warm. Across the street, children played hopscotch on the sidewalk, their laughter carried by the wind. "Do you think Mama would like the garden we planted?" she asked, pointing to the patch of flowers by the entrance. "She will love it," he said. "It smells like hope." She nodded, looking up at the building. "I am glad we came back." "Me too," he said. "You taught me something, Lila. That sometimes the smallest voices make the biggest changes." She looked up at him with quiet pride. "You listened," she said. The streetlight flickered on above them, casting a golden glow. The city moved around them, cars passing, people talking, but for a moment, everything felt still, peaceful. Lila held her hand over her heart, the same way she did the day they first met, when she clutched that bottle of medicine. "I am going to keep helping here," she said firmly, "even when I grow up." "I believe you will," Nathaniel said. "And when you do, this place will belong to you in every way that matters." As they stood together in the fading light, the wind chime above the door sang once more, a soft and steady tune that carried into the evening, like a promise fulfilled and still growing. Several months after the grand opening, the Lila Hope Community Health Center had become a familiar part of the city's daily rhythm. Every morning, before the first patient arrived, Lila walked through the hallways with a clipboard that was almost too big for her, checking that the waiting room chairs were clean, that the toys for the children were arranged neatly, and that the wind chime by the door sang softly when the sunlight touched it. Nathaniel often arrived early too, though he pretended it was coincidence. He would stand by the window in the lobby, watching her work with a focus that could humble a room full of adults. The staff had long stopped questioning why a billionaire spent so much time there. He was no longer the man in the suit. He was simply Mr. Royce, the quiet volunteer who helped stock supplies and carried boxes. On one particular morning, Lila noticed him struggling with a heavy container of bottled water and hurried over. "You should not lift that," she said earnestly. "You are important. Important people are supposed to point at things, not carry them." He laughed, setting the box down gently. "Who told you that?" "Mama," she said with a small grin, but I think she was teasing. "She was," he said, smiling. "And you are wrong about me, Lila. Important people are the ones who help, not the ones who tell others to do it." She considered that for a moment, then nodded in agreement. "Then I guess you are the most important person here." He shook his head. "No, you are." Her laughter echoed softly through the hall. Later that day, as the clinic filled with patients, a problem arose. The pharmacy inside the center had run out of a specific kind of medicine, an antibiotic that a mother desperately needed for her child. The supply truck had been delayed, and the next delivery would not arrive until the following morning. The nurse at the desk looked distressed, her voice low as she explained the situation to Nathaniel. Before he could respond, Lila appeared beside them. "What kind of medicine?" she asked. The nurse told her, and Lila's face lit up with recognition. "The pharmacy near the bridge has that one. The man there said they always keep extra for emergencies." Nathaniel blinked, remembering the same place, the same fluorescent lights, the same countertop where she had once counted her pennies. "You remember that?" he asked quietly. "I remember everything," she said. "Can we go get it?" The nurse hesitated. "It is a long walk, sweetheart." "Not if we hurry," Lila said. Nathaniel looked at the nurse. "I will drive her. It will take 10 minutes. The nurse agreed reluctantly, and soon Nathaniel and Lila were in his car, the city passing by in streaks of light and shadow. When they reached the pharmacy, Lila led the way confidently. The same cashier who had once stood behind that counter looked up, startled to see her again. "Well, if it is not the little lady with the brave heart," he said warmly. "You remember me?" she asked. "How could I forget? You changed a grumpy man's day once," he said, nodding toward Nathaniel, who smiled faintly. "We need a bottle of amoxicillin," Nathaniel said, "for the clinic on Oak Street." The man nodded and brought it from the shelf. When he handed it over, Lila reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded bill. "How much?" she asked. The man shook his head. "For you, kiddo, it is free." Lila frowned. "But that is not fair. Fair is you helping others," he said kindly. "Now go save someone's day again." Nathaniel thanked him, and they returned to the car. On the way back, the air between them was quiet, filled with the low hum of the engine and the sound of passing traffic. Lila stared out the window, her voice thoughtful. "It feels strange coming back there," she said. "It used to be scary. Now it feels safe." Nathaniel nodded. "Sometimes places change because we do." "Or maybe," she said, "we change because we have to." When they arrived at the clinic, the mother and her child were waiting anxiously in the lobby. Lila hurried over, holding out the small bag of medicine. "Here you go," she said, her voice full of calm assurance. The woman took it with trembling hands, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Lila smiled. "You are welcome." As Nathaniel watched, he realized the full circle of that moment. The place that had once broken his pride now stood as the symbol of healing for others. Later that evening, after the last patient had left and the lights dimmed, Lila found him sitting in his office, staring at the framed photo of the clinic's opening day. "You look sad," she said softly. He shook his head. "Not sad, just remembering." She walked closer. "Remembering can hurt and help at the same time." He smiled faintly. "You sound older than you are." "Mama says I think too much," she replied. "She says I get that from you." He laughed quietly. "Then that is a compliment." The night outside deepened, and the wind chime by the door played its soft tune. Nathaniel turned to her and said, "You know, Lila, today you reminded me again why this place exists. It is not about money or buildings. It is about moments like this." She tilted her head. "What kind of moment?" "The kind," he said, "that reminds you you are exactly where you are supposed to be." Lila smiled. The simple kind of smile that carried more meaning than words could hold, and nodded. "Then I guess we both are." The following weeks carried a quiet rhythm that wrapped around the health center like a steady heartbeat. The flow of patients came and went, the volunteers rotated through their shifts, and every morning, the same wind chime sang its silver song at the entrance. For Nathaniel, those sounds had become more than background noise. They were the pulse of something he never knew he needed. He had spent decades chasing deadlines, closing deals, and measuring success in zeros and profit margins. Now, the laughter of a little girl organizing medical charts meant more than any applause from a boardroom. One late afternoon, sunlight poured through the tall windows, turning the floors golden. Nathaniel stood in the staff lounge with a paper cup of coffee, watching Lila and her mother arrange a donation box near the front desk. The sign on it read, "Milk for Little Ones." He had not suggested it, Lila had. She had overheard a patient mention that they could not afford baby formula, and by that evening, she had gathered a small group of children to collect donations. "We can help," she had said. "Even a little is better than nothing." Now, the box was already half full, and the sight of it filled Nathaniel with quiet admiration. Lila ran toward him, wiping her hands on her blue sweater. "We raised $30, she said proudly. "Well, 32 and some change. I counted twice." He smiled. "You never miss a number, do you?" "Mama says numbers are promises," she said. "If you count wrong, you break one." Nathaniel looked at her and felt something familiar, stir a reflection of the same lesson he had once learned the hard way. Before he could respond, her mother approached, holding a tray with 2 mugs. "You are staying for dinner, right?" she asked. "It is just soup and bread, but it is good." "I would be honored," he said. They sat at a small round table in the lounge, sharing the meal as the light outside faded to orange. Lila talked about school, about how she wanted to learn first aid, about how she practiced wrapping bandages on her stuffed animals. Nathaniel listened, laughing softly when she described using her brother Elijah as a pretend patient. "He does not like it," she said, "but he lets me anyway." Her mother smiled. "He will be a doctor someday if she keeps this up." The warmth in the room was something Nathaniel could feel in his bones, a sense of belonging he had not felt since he was a boy. As they finished eating, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook. "Lila," he said, "do you want to see something?" She nodded eagerly. He flipped it open to a sketch, an early blueprint of an expansion to the health center. "This," he explained, "will be a classroom and a small study area for students who want to learn about medicine and helping others." Her eyes widened. "Like me?" "Exactly like you," he said. "I want you to help design it." She looked at the drawing, tracing her finger along the lines. "Can there be flowers outside?" she asked. "And maybe a bench under a tree where people can rest after work?" "Anything you want," he said. "You are the inspiration for this place. You should help shape its future." She beamed, the kind of smile that seemed to light up everything it touched. "Then I will make it the most beautiful place ever." Her mother laughed. "You already did, sweetheart." Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Nathaniel stayed behind to finish paperwork. The clinic was quiet now, the halls dimly lit, the faint smell of disinfectant lingering in the air. He walked through the empty waiting room, stopping by the donation box. Someone had slipped in a folded note along with a few coins. Curious, he opened it. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. It read, "Thank you for helping my son today. You did not just give him medicine, you gave him kindness." Nathaniel closed the note carefully and placed it back. As he turned to leave, the sound of the wind chime floated through the air again, delicate and clear. He paused, staring at it for a long moment. He realized that the sound reminded him of Lila's voice, soft, unassuming, but impossible to ignore. The next morning, he arrived before sunrise. The sky was pale pink, and the streets were still empty. Lila was already there, sitting on the front steps with a sketchbook in her lap. "You are early," he said. She grinned. "I wanted to draw the new classroom before anyone comes." She turned the sketchbook toward him, revealing a detailed drawing of the expansion. It had the flowers, the bench, and a wide window that looked out toward the sunrise. "See," she said, "it is for people to breathe after a hard day." Nathaniel studied it, his throat tight. "It is perfect," he said softly. She smiled. "Mama says I dream too big. Tell her that is how all good things start," he said. They sat together on the steps, the morning unfolding slowly around them. For a while, neither spoke. The city woke up in the distance, but there was peace in that moment, a stillness that needed no words. Finally, Lila looked up and said, "You know, mister, you look happier now." He glanced at her. "Do I?" "Yes," she said. "Before, you looked like someone who forgot where home was, but now you look like you found it." Her words landed softly but deeply. Nathaniel smiled, the first sunlight catching his face. "Maybe I did," he said. And as the wind chime rang above them, he realized she was right. As the months passed, the health center flourished beyond what anyone had imagined. It became more than a building. It became a heartbeat for the community. People came not only for treatment, but for connection, for comfort, for hope. Yet success, Nathaniel knew, often drew eyes that did not understand its purpose. One Thursday morning, he arrived to find a sleek black car parked near the entrance. Two men in tailored suits stood beside it, one of them holding a tablet. They were investors from the Royce Foundation Board, the very people who had once followed his every word without question. Now they looked at the clinic with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Nathaniel," one of them began as he approached, "we have been trying to reach you. You missed 3 board meetings." Nathaniel nodded. "I have been busy here." The man gestured toward the building. "Busy giving away money?" His tone carried a smirk. "This place costs a fortune to run, and from what I hear, you are funding most of it yourself. The board wants to know if this is a wise use of resources." Before Nathaniel could respond, the door opened and Lila stepped outside, carrying a stack of papers almost as tall as her chest. She froze when she saw the men in suits, her expression polite but cautious. "Morning, mister," she said to Nathaniel. "We are short on bandages, but the nurse said it is okay. We can use gauze instead." The two men exchanged looks. "Who is this?" one of them asked. Nathaniel smiled. "This is Lila. She runs half the place." Lila blinked, unsure whether he was joking. The taller man gave a quick, forced chuckle. "Well, that explains a lot." His voice dripped with condescension. Lila tilted her head slightly, studying him the same way she had once studied the cashier who refused to take her coins. "It explains that people are working," she said softly but clearly. The man seemed caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "You said it explains a lot," she continued calmly. "It explains that people care enough to help." Nathaniel felt a slow smile tug at the corner of his mouth. The man opened his mouth to retort, but Nathaniel raised a hand. "Lila, would you take these reports to the nurse's office, please?" She nodded, still watching the men with steady eyes, then disappeared inside. When she was gone, Nathaniel turned back to the investors. "You came here to question my judgment. That is fine. But do not insult the people who make this place work." The taller man sighed. "You are a businessman, Nathaniel. You used to understand numbers. What is the return on this?" Nathaniel looked toward the doorway where the wind chime hung, swaying gently in the breeze. "The return," he said, "is that a child who once could not afford medicine now helps others get it. The return is that people come here and remember they matter." "That is not measurable," the man replied. "Then maybe you are measuring the wrong things," Nathaniel said quietly. The men exchanged another glance, muttered something about reviewing the budget, and left. When their car disappeared down the street, Nathaniel exhaled slowly. He turned to see Lila standing in the doorway again, watching him with curious eyes. "Were they mad?" she asked. "They were confused," he said. "Some people do not understand kindness when they cannot count it." "Then we will teach them," she said with a confident nod. "You can teach anyone if you talk long enough," he laughed softly. "You might be right." That evening, as the clinic closed, he found her sitting at the front desk, drawing something in her notebook. "What are you working on?" he asked. "A story," she said without looking up. "About a man who forgot how to see people until a little girl showed him." He raised an eyebrow. "That sounds familiar." "It is fiction," she said quickly, pretending to hide the page. "Mostly." He smiled, feeling the warmth of her words sink in. As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "Mister, are you going to quit because those men were mean?" He looked back at her, his expression firm but gentle. "No, Lila, I do not quit things that matter." She nodded, satisfied. "Good, because people still need this place." The next morning, the first patients arrived earlier than usual. A mother holding her newborn baby, a construction worker with a hurt wrist, an old man carrying flowers for the nurse who had helped his wife recover. The lobby filled with soft chatter and the sound of the wind chime, ringing like a gentle applause. Nathaniel stood near the entrance, watching it all unfold. Lila joined him, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. "For you," she said, handing him one. "It is not coffee, but it is warm." "Perfect," he said. Together they watched as the morning light spilled through the glass doors, bathing the room in gold. "Do you think they will come back?" she asked, referring to the investors. "Maybe," he said, "but by then." They will see what real value looks like. She smiled, sipping her drink. You know, mister, I think you used to be lonely. He looked at her, caught off guard by the simple truth in her tone. And what am I now? Busy, she said. Busy being happy. He chuckled quietly, the sound blending with the chime above them. For the first time in years, he realized that was exactly what he was. Winter arrived quietly, wrapping the city in a thin veil of frost. The air outside the clinic turned crisp, and the mornings began with clouds of breath rising like ghosts of dreams that refused to fade. The Lila Hope Community Health Center remained a beacon of warmth. Every day, its doors opened before sunrise, welcoming people who had nowhere else to go. Nathaniel had started coming earlier too, long before the first patient appeared. He liked the silence of the early hours, the hum of the heater, and the faint metallic song of the wind chime greeting the dawn. On one such morning, he found Lila sitting by the front desk with her head resting on her arms, a pencil still clutched in her hand. Her notebook lay open, filled with sketches of people she had met: patients, nurses, children, and even him. She stirred when he spoke softly. You fell asleep on duty, he teased. She blinked and yawned. I was drawing. I did not mean to. He smiled and poured her a cup of warm cocoa from the machine. Here, he said. Drink this before it gets cold. She took it gratefully. Thank you, mister. Outside, snowflakes began to drift past the window, soft and slow. It is snowing, she said, her eyes wide with wonder. Do you like snow? He asked. She nodded quickly. It makes the world quiet. Nathaniel looked out at the falling flakes and thought about how right she was. The world did seem quieter now, softer around the edges. But that peace was soon broken. Around mid-morning, a nurse hurried toward him, her face pale. Mr. Royce, she said urgently, we need you in the waiting room. It is Lila's mother. His heart dropped. He followed her quickly, his footsteps echoing against the tile. In the corner of the waiting area, Lila's mother sat slumped in a chair, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Lila knelt beside her, clutching her hand tightly. Mama, please, she whispered, her voice trembling. Nathaniel crouched down beside them. What happened? She was fine this morning, Lila said, tears welling in her eyes. Then she said she was dizzy. The nurse checked her pulse. Her blood pressure is very low, she said quietly. We need to get her to the hospital. Nathaniel stood immediately. I will drive. Within minutes, he and Lila were in the back seat of his car, her mother lying against the seat, wrapped in blankets. Harris drove fast but careful, the snow swirling outside the windshield. Lila held her mother's hand the whole way, whispering softly, as if her voice could keep her awake. You are going to be okay, Mama. I promise. Nathaniel watched her in the mirror, his chest tightening. The drive to the hospital felt longer than any journey he had ever taken. When they arrived, doctors and nurses rushed her mother onto a stretcher and wheeled her inside. Lila tried to follow, but a nurse stopped her gently. We will take care of her, sweetheart. You have to wait here. Nathaniel placed a steady hand on her shoulder. We will wait together, he said. Hours passed in the sterile light of the hospital corridor. Lila sat beside him, silent now, her small fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. Nathaniel could not remember the last time he had prayed, but in that moment, he found himself doing exactly that, wordlessly asking for mercy, for time, for one more chance. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was calm but grave. She is stable, he said, but she needs rest and proper medication. She has been pushing herself too hard. Lila exhaled shakily, relief flooding her face. Can I see her? Just for a minute, the doctor said. Nathaniel nodded. Go on, he whispered. Lila ran down the hallway, disappearing into the room. Nathaniel leaned against the wall, his eyes closing for a brief moment. The exhaustion hit him like a wave, not from the day, but from caring so deeply for something fragile and real. When Lila returned, her eyes were red, but she smiled faintly. She said, thank you, she whispered. She said you always keep your promises. He knelt down to meet her gaze. We both do, he said softly. You kept yours first. On the drive back, the snow had stopped. The streets shimmered under the lamplight, and the city felt like it was holding its breath. Lila rested her head against the window, the reflection of passing lights flickering across her face. "Mister," she said quietly, "what if Mama gets sick again?" Nathaniel thought for a long moment before answering. "Then we will be there," he said. "You are not alone anymore." She nodded, her eyes heavy with sleep. By the time they reached home, she was dozing, her small hand still clutching his sleeve. He carried her gently to her apartment, laying her on the couch beside a blanket. The wind chime above the door stirred as he stepped out, its soft ring following him into the cold night. Later, back in his car, he sat for a long time without starting the engine. Snow began to fall again, whispering against the windshield. For the first time, he realized that the fear he felt was not of losing control or wealth or reputation. It was the fear of losing what truly mattered, the people who had reminded him what it meant to have a heart that cared. In that quiet moment, he made himself a promise. He would not let this family face another storm alone. Not now, not ever. The following morning, sunlight spilled softly through the hospital windows, turning the sterile walls into shades of pale gold. Nathaniel sat by the bed where Lila's mother rested, her breathing slow but steady. Machines hummed quietly, and the faint scent of antiseptic lingered in the air. Lila sat beside him, her small hands folded over her knees, eyes fixed on her mother's face. She looked older in that moment, not in years but in strength. When her mother finally stirred, Lila's eyes lit up. "Mama," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. Her mother smiled faintly. "I told you not to worry, sweetheart." Nathaniel stood and offered her a small cup of water. "You gave us quite a scare," he said gently. She managed a weak laugh. "I have had worse. Just need rest." Lila leaned closer, her forehead touching her mother's arm. "You scared me," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought—" Her mother reached out, brushing her daughter's hair with trembling fingers. "Hush, baby. I am still here." Nathaniel turned away for a moment, pretending to check the chart, though his eyes were misted. A nurse entered quietly, adjusting the blanket and checking the monitors. "She will be fine," the nurse assured. "Her pressure is stabilizing. She just needs a few days." Lila exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her body. Nathaniel nodded in gratitude. When the nurse left, he turned to Lila's mother. "You will not have to worry about the bills. The clinic will handle it." She frowned weakly. "Nathaniel, you have already done enough." "Not for me," he said simply. "For her." He nodded toward Lila, who was now humming softly to herself, tracing circles on the back of her mother's hand. "She is the reason this place exists." Her mother's eyes softened. "You know, she used to talk about you before we even met you. Said she met a man who looked like he belonged to another world but still stopped to listen." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "She gave me more than she knows." That afternoon, he stepped outside for air. The hospital courtyard was quiet, blanketed by snow. He stood under a leafless tree, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. As he watched the flakes drift down, he felt a gentle tug at his sleeve. Lila had followed him out, bundled in her coat and scarf. "Mama fell asleep," she said softly. "The nurse said it is good." "It is," he said, his voice warm. They stood together in silence, watching a few children play near the edge of the courtyard. "You know," she began, "I used to think hospitals were scary, all the lights and noises, but now it feels different." "How so?" he asked. "It feels like people care, like no one is alone here." Nathaniel nodded, staring out at the snow. "That is how it should be." She tilted her head, studying him the way she always did when she sensed he was holding something back. "Are you okay, mister?" He smiled faintly. "I am now." Later that evening, the hospital corridor filled with the soft glow of sunset. Nathaniel sat again by her mother's bed while Lila read aloud from a children's book. The rhythmic sound of her voice and the beeping of the monitors created a strange, fragile peace. When the chapter ended, Lila looked up. "Mama says when people are sick, stories help them heal faster." "Your stories definitely do," Nathaniel said. "Then I will keep reading," she said, her eyes determined. Over the next few days, her mother improved steadily. The color returned to her cheeks, and the faint laugh that once filled their apartment began to return. Nurses began calling Lila the little helper, as she fetched water cups, straightened pillows, and handed out smiles as if they were medicine. Nathaniel watched all of it quietly, realizing how much light she carried wherever she went. On the fourth morning, the doctor entered with good news. "She is clear to go home," he said with a smile. Lila gasped, throwing her arms around her mother carefully. "You hear that, Mama? We can go home." Tears sparkled in her mother's eyes. "Home sounds wonderful." Nathaniel walked to the window, hiding the small sigh of relief that escaped him. When he turned back, Lila was packing her sketchbook and the small stuffed bear she had brought from home. "Are you coming to the clinic tomorrow?" she asked. "I would not miss it," he said. As they left the hospital, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, casting long golden rays across the snow. Lila stopped at the doors, looking up at the sky. "Mama says when the sun comes out after snow, it means God remembered the world." Nathaniel followed her gaze. "Then I guess he just remembered us." Back at the clinic, the staff greeted them with smiles and cheers. The patients who had come to know Lila and her mother brought small gifts, flowers, cards, and one elderly woman had baked a pie. "For our little angel," she said, kissing Lila's forehead. Lila laughed shyly, her cheeks flushing. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Nathaniel stood in his office, watching through the window as Lila and her mother crossed the street toward their apartment. They held hands, walking slowly through the falling snow. The faint sound of their laughter drifted up to him through the cold air. For a long moment, he stayed there, motionless. He realized he had spent years building towers that touched the sky, but this was the only foundation that had ever made him feel grounded. The wind chime outside the clinic swayed, its song carrying through the quiet night. Nathaniel closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him like a prayer that had finally been answered. Spring came early that year, the kind that brushed the city with soft wind and the scent of blooming magnolias. The snow melted slowly from the streets, leaving behind the clear hum of renewal. The Lila Hope Community Health Center felt alive again. The garden that Lila had once drawn in her sketchbook was now real, with bright flowers swaying beside the entrance and a wooden bench under a young maple tree. Nathaniel often found her there after school, her backpack beside her, a book in her lap. On one of those afternoons, he approached quietly, watching her squint at the sunlight reflecting off the pages. "What are you reading?" he asked. She looked up, smiling. "A story about a girl who wants to build something that helps everyone." "Sounds familiar," he said, sitting down beside her. She giggled softly. Maybe a little. The warmth of the day carried a calm rhythm. Inside the clinic, laughter and conversation drifted through the open windows. A group of volunteers from the university had joined that week, bringing new energy and plans for expanding their outreach. Nathaniel had agreed to fund a mobile medical van that would travel to rural areas, a dream Lila had suggested months ago. "If people cannot come to us," she had said, "then we should go to them." Now, that dream was taking shape. As they sat in the garden, a nurse stepped outside and waved. "Mr. Royce, a reporter is here to see you. She wants to do a story on the clinic." Nathaniel sighed softly. He had never liked interviews, but he nodded. "Tell her I will be there in a moment." When he stood, Lila tugged at his sleeve. "Do not let them make it all about you," she said. "It is not your story alone." He smiled, impressed by how easily she could see through everything. "Then you should help me tell it." Inside, the reporter, a young woman with sharp eyes and a soft voice, set up her camera near the front desk. "I have read about your center," she said. "People say it has changed lives. What inspired you to start it?" Nathaniel hesitated for a moment, then glanced toward Lila, who stood just behind him, pretending to organize papers but listening closely. "A little girl," he said simply, "someone who reminded me what it means to care." The reporter smiled. "And where is she now?" "Right there," he said, nodding toward Lila. She froze, eyes wide, then blushed deeply as the camera turned slightly. "She works here," Nathaniel added. "She has since the beginning." "That is wonderful," the reporter said, lowering the microphone. "Would you mind sharing your story?" Lila bit her lip. "It is not that special." "I think it is," the woman replied. "Sometimes the smallest stories matter most." Lila glanced at Nathaniel, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a breath, she spoke. "When I was little, I went to a pharmacy with just a handful of coins. My brother was sick, and I wanted to buy medicine. A man there said I did not belong. Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued. But another man him stood up for me. I did not know who he was then. I just knew he listened. Nathaniel's chest tightened as her words carried across the quiet lobby. He helped my brother, and he helped me believe that trying matters. Now we help others who are trying too. The reporter lowered the microphone slowly, her eyes glistening. That is the story, she said softly. The interview ended, but its weight lingered in the room long after. Later that evening, Nathaniel stood alone in his office, watching the footage replay on a small monitor. He heard her voice again, the tremor, the strength, and realized it was not a story about charity. It was a story about redemption. The next morning, the piece aired on the local news. By noon, the phone at the clinic rang non-stop. Donations poured in from across the city. Volunteers signed up. Schools sent letters asking if their students could visit and learn. The story had spread far beyond what Nathaniel expected. When he told Lila about it, she laughed in disbelief. I just talked, she said. You told the truth, he replied. That is harder than people think. A week later, the mayor's office called, inviting them both to a community event honoring local heroes. Lila's mother cried when she heard the news. You see, she told her daughter, you changed the world by being kind. On the day of the event, the air was filled with music and the smell of food trucks lining the park. Children played near the fountain, their laughter rising above the noise of the crowd. When Lila's name was called, she walked onto the stage beside Nathaniel, holding his hand. The applause was loud, warm, and endless. She looked at the crowd, shy but radiant. This is for everyone who ever counted pennies, she said into the microphone, because sometimes hope starts small, but it grows when people care. The audience fell silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in cheers. Nathaniel looked down at her, his heart swelling with pride. As the sun set behind the skyline, turning the sky orange and pink, he realized that this moment, this child, this place was the truest investment of his life. When they left the stage, Lila looked up at him. Did we do good, mister? She asked. We did more than good, he said, smiling. We did right. The wind picked up again, carrying the faint sound of laughter and applause, blending into the rhythm of a city finally remembering how to care. The weeks after the awards ceremony felt like a dream that refused to fade. The clinic was busier than ever, filled with new volunteers and patients who had heard Lila's story and wanted to be part of it. Nathaniel noticed that people smiled more when they walked in now. They no longer came only for treatment but for something deeper hope. He would often find Lila in the lobby surrounded by children, showing them how to count coins or read labels on medicine bottles. She always began with the same words, "This is what trying looks like." Her mother, now stronger and full of life, had taken a part-time job helping manage patient files at the clinic. She worked quietly but with pride, always keeping an eye on her daughter. One warm afternoon, Nathaniel stood outside by the garden, watching Lila chase her brother Elijah around the bench near the maple tree. Their laughter echoed through the air, and for a moment he allowed himself to simply exist in that sound. The past felt far away now. The man who once stood in a pharmacy judging a little girl had become a man who waited each day just to hear her laughter. A nurse stepped out and handed him a clipboard. We just got the final approval for the mobile medical van, she said. It is ready to launch next week. Nathaniel smiled. That was Lila's idea. She should be the one to announce it. The nurse grinned. She already told everyone before I could. He laughed softly, not surprised. That evening, as the clinic quieted down, Lila found him in his office, sketching plans for the new outreach route. Mister, she said, leaning against the doorframe. Mama says we should name the van. We should, he agreed. Do you have any ideas? She thought for a moment, then said, we should call it The Promise. He looked up, smiling. Why that name? Because we promise to help people, she said simply. And we keep our promises. He nodded slowly. The Promise it is. Over the next few days, the community helped decorate the van. Children painted bright stars and hearts along the sides, while volunteers wrote messages of hope near the back door. Lila painted a small handprint near the front bumper and signed her name beside it. When she was done, she looked up at Nathaniel. Now everyone will know it is ours. Ours, he repeated softly, touched by the word. The day of the launch arrived with a clear blue sky. The entire neighborhood gathered outside the clinic to watch. The mayor attended again, shaking Nathaniel's hand and praising the work they had done. But Nathaniel deflected every compliment, pointing instead to Lila. She is the reason any of this exists, he said to the crowd. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped up to the small podium, holding a piece of paper she had written on carefully. Her voice wavered at first, but then it grew stronger. This van will go where people need it most, she said, because kindness should not have a home that stands still. It should move, it should travel, it should find people wherever they are. The crowd erupted in applause. Nathaniel felt his chest tighten with emotion. After the ceremony, as the van rolled away on its first mission, Lila stood beside him, waving until it disappeared down the street. Do you think it will help a lot of people? She asked. I know it will, he said. You started something that cannot stop now. That evening, as the sun set behind the buildings, Nathaniel found himself sitting on the same bench under the maple tree. Lila joined him, holding 2 cups of cocoa. I saved you one, she said. You are starting to sound like a boss, he teased. Maybe I am, she said proudly. Mama says I am learning from the best. They sat quietly, watching the last rays of light fade from the sky. A soft breeze stirred the wind chime above the clinic's door, its melody gentle and familiar. After a while, Lila spoke again, her voice thoughtful. Mister, do you ever think about that day in the pharmacy? He turned to her, surprised. Every day, he admitted. It was the day I learned who I wanted to be. She smiled, looking down at the warm cup in her hands. Me too. I was scared then. But now, when I think about it, I am glad it happened. Because if it did not, we would not be here. Nathaniel nodded, his throat tight. Sometimes the hardest days bring us to the right ones. She looked up at him, her expression soft and sure. I think that is what faith is. He could not speak for a moment, only smiled. The air grew cooler, and the first stars began to appear above the city skyline. It is getting late, he said gently. I will walk you home. She nodded, slipping her small hand into his. Together they crossed the street, their footsteps echoing softly on the pavement. When they reached her building, she looked up at him. Good night, mister, she said. Good night, Lila, he replied. As she climbed the stairs, he waited until the door closed behind her before turning back toward the clinic. The sign above the entrance glowed softly in the dark. The Lila Hope Community Health Center. He stood there for a long time, the sound of the wind chime following him like a quiet heartbeat, steady and eternal, a promise still kept. Summer arrived with long golden evenings and air filled with the sound of laughter spilling from the clinic garden. The maple tree had grown taller, its branches stretching wide enough to cast shade over the bench where Nathaniel and Lila often Saturday. The flowers she had planted months ago bloomed in brilliant colors, painting the entrance in hues of hope. It had been almost 2 years since the day at the pharmacy, and yet Nathaniel remembered every detail as though it had happened yesterday, the trembling of her small hands counting coins, the quiet strength in her voice, the moment his heart had shifted. Life had changed since then. He had changed. The man who once built towers now built trust. That afternoon, the clinic was busy but calm. The mobile van, the Promise, had returned from another trip, its sides covered in new handprints from children in towns it had visited. Volunteers unloaded boxes of supplies, and Lila stood at the center of it all, directing everyone with the confidence of someone far older than her years. Nathaniel watched from the doorway, pride swelling in his chest. You are a natural leader, he said as she walked by carrying a clipboard. She grinned. Mama says I got that from you. He laughed softly. I think you got it from yourself. She handed him a list of supplies. We need more medicine for coughs and bandages, and I think we should start collecting books for the kids in the waiting area. He nodded. That is a good idea. It was Mama's, she said with a smile. Her mother had become one of the most trusted figures at the clinic, organizing records and helping families navigate their treatments. She often said the work gave her a reason to get up every morning. As the day went on, clouds gathered above the city, the sky turning the color of slate. By evening, thunder rumbled in the distance. The volunteers packed up early, and Nathaniel began locking the doors while Lila and her mother prepared to leave. We can give you a ride home, he said. It looks like rain. We will be fine, her mother said gently. It is not far. But before they could step outside, the rain began a sudden downpour that hammered against the windows. Lila laughed, pressing her hands against the glass. It is beautiful, she said. Nathaniel watched her, remembering how she had once looked at snow the same way with wonder, not fear. Sometimes, he said, storms can be beautiful too. The power flickered, then went out, leaving the clinic bathed in the soft glow of emergency lights. Lila clapped her hands. It feels like magic. Her laughter echoed through the hallway. Nathaniel lit a small flashlight from his desk and handed it to her. Here, he said, you can be our guide. She took it eagerly, leading the way through the halls, pretending to be an explorer. Left turn, she shouted. Watch out for imaginary crocodiles. Even her mother laughed, shaking her head. She never stops, she said. Do not make her, Nathaniel replied. The world needs people who still know how to imagine. When the rain finally softened, the sound of dripping filled the air. Lila ran to the door and pushed it open slightly. The streets shimmered under puddles, reflecting the streetlights like scattered stars. It smells clean, she said. Nathaniel stood behind her, feeling the cool air rush in. The world always smells new after a storm, he said. It reminds us to start again. Her mother smiled. You two talk like poets. Lila turned to her. We talk like people who listen. They all laughed. Nathaniel offered them his umbrella and walked them halfway home. The rain had turned into a mist that clung to the streetlights. They passed the old bridge, now painted fresh blue, and the small corner pharmacy where everything had begun. It was closed, but the wind chime still hung above its door. Lila noticed it immediately. It is still there, she said. It sounds different, though. Nathaniel nodded. Maybe because we are listening differently now. They stopped for a moment, letting the soft sound of the chime fill the silence. Then Lila reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. I made something, she said shyly, handing it to him. He opened it carefully. It was a drawing of the clinic, surrounded by smiling faces, with the words written across the top in neat handwriting. The promise never ends. His throat tightened as he looked at it. It is beautiful, he said. Can I hang this in my office? She nodded proudly. It is for everyone to see. When they reached her building, she turned before going inside. Good night, mister, she said. Thank you for walking with us. Always, he said. As she and her mother disappeared through the doorway, Nathaniel looked down at the drawing again. Raindrops clung to its edges, but the ink did not blur. The words stayed clear, steady, unshaken just like her. As he walked back toward the clinic, the night grew still. The city lights shimmered against the wet pavement, and in the distance, the wind chimes sang one last time. For Nathaniel, it was no longer just a sound. It was a memory, a reminder, and a promise carried through every storm that life would bring. Autumn returned to the city, brushing the streets with shades of amber and gold. The maple tree outside the Lila Hope Community Health Center shed its leaves like slow-moving confetti, blanketing the bench where Nathaniel and Lila often talked after the clinic closed. The air carried the faint scent of rain and change. 2 years had passed since the first day she stepped into his life with a handful of pennies, and yet the memory of that moment still lived in the corners of his mind as clearly as the sound of the wind chime that hung above the clinic door. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Every morning, Lila arrived early, helping her mother prepare charts and supplies. Her brother Elijah had started school and often visited the clinic after classes, proudly wearing a small badge that read, Junior Helper. Nathaniel had become a constant in their lives, not as a benefactor but as something closer to family. Yet beneath the calm, something stirred a whisper that time was moving forward faster than any of them realized. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, painting the windows with amber light, Lila burst into Nathaniel's office holding a letter. Mister, guess what? She said breathlessly. Our school is having a science fair, and I'm going to build a model of a hospital like ours. Nathaniel smiled, setting aside his papers. That sounds incredible. What will you call it? She grinned proudly. The Promise Project. The name made him pause. That is perfect, he said softly. Do you need any help? Maybe, she said, her eyes sparkling. I want it to show how kindness spreads, like when one person helps another, and that person helps someone else, and it never stops. He nodded, deeply moved by how she always saw the world in circles of compassion. Then we will build it together, he said. Over the next few weeks, the clinic became a workshop. Cardboard walls, tiny cutout figures, and small LED lights covered the break room table. Lila worked after school with a determination that made everyone smile. Her mother often brought snacks and hot chocolate, and even the nurses stopped by to admire her progress. You are going to win for sure, one of them said. Lila laughed. Winning does not matter. I just want people to see that hope can look like a building. Nathaniel looked at her then, realizing she was no longer the small, frightened girl who had counted coins under the harsh pharmacy lights. She was growing into someone powerful, someone who believed that even the smallest gesture could heal. The day of the science fair arrived bright and cool. The school gymnasium was filled with rows of colorful displays, solar systems, volcanoes, robots made of scrap metal, but none drew a crowd like Lila's. Her project stood at the center, a perfect miniature of the clinic, complete with the wind chime above the door, and the words, "The promise never ends," written across the front. Parents and teachers gathered around, listening as she explained. This is not just a hospital, she said confidently. It is a place where people remember they matter. Because sometimes, you do not just fix the body, you fix the heart too. Her voice carried across the room, soft yet strong. Nathaniel stood at the back, watching quietly, pride swelling in his chest. When the judges finished their tour, one of them approached Lila. "Young lady," he said, "this is one of the most thoughtful projects we have ever seen." She smiled, looking down shyly. "Thank you, sir." As the ceremony ended, she did not seem to care whether she had won or not. She ran straight to Nathaniel, holding the model carefully. "Did you see it?" she asked. "I saw everything," he said. "You did more than build a model, Lila. You built a story." That evening, as they walked home together, the sky turned shades of deep purple and gold. Lila carried the small hospital in her arms like a treasure. "Do you think one day I can build a real one?" she asked. "I do not think," he said. "I know." She looked up at him, smiling, then fell quiet, her steps matching his. After a moment, she said softly, "Mister, I think people forget that the smallest things can change everything, like a penny or a promise." He nodded, his heart tightening. "And sometimes, the smallest people do the biggest things," she giggled. "Like me? Exactly like you," he said. When they reached her building, her mother waved from the window, calling them in for dinner. The lights inside looked warm, golden, alive. Before going in, Lila turned back to him. "Thank you for helping me," she said. "Always," he replied. "That is what promises are for." As he walked back toward the clinic, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint, familiar sound of the chime. It sang softly through the evening air, blending with the laughter from across the street. Nathaniel paused, looking up at the glowing sign above the clinic door, and for the first time, he realized that the legacy he was building was not made of money or glass. It was made of moments, each one born from the courage of a little girl who had once counted pennies and taught a man how to measure worth differently. Winter returned with quiet grace, draping the city in silver and calm. The maple tree outside the clinic stood bare now, its branches etched like ink against the pale sky. Inside, warmth radiated from every corner of the Lila Hope Community Health Center. The waiting room glowed with soft lights and the hum of gentle laughter. The shelves were lined with holiday cards sent by families the clinic had helped, each one carrying a small note of gratitude. Nathaniel read them often, not for praise but as proof that kindness had taken root. Lila had grown taller over the past year, her voice steadier, her steps more confident. She still carried her sketchbook everywhere, now filled with new designs, schools, shelters, libraries, places for people to feel safe, she would say when asked. On a quiet afternoon in December, as the first flakes of snow began to fall, she rushed into Nathaniel's office with her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. "Mister," she said breathless, "I have an idea." He looked up from his paperwork, smiling. "Another one?" "The best one," she said proudly. We should do a Christmas drive for the families who cannot afford gifts. We can collect warm clothes, toys, and food. Everyone deserves something to smile about." He leaned back, thoughtful. "You are right, but it will take planning." "Then we will plan," she said. "We still have 2 weeks." He laughed softly, amazed by her determination. "All right," he said. "You are in charge." The next few days turned into a whirlwind of activity. Lila made posters, her mother organized lists, and volunteers filled boxes with donations. Even Elijah helped, sorting toys into piles by size. Nathaniel coordinated with local shops, securing extra blankets and food supplies. By the end of the week, the clinic's lobby looked like a small warehouse of goodwill. "It is perfect," Lila said, standing in the center with her hands on her hips. "Almost," Nathaniel replied. "We still need someone to deliver everything." "We will all go," she said immediately. Together, on Christmas Eve, snow fell steadily, soft and silent. The clinic van, the Promise, was packed full of gifts and food. Lila, her mother, Elijah, and Nathaniel climbed inside, joined by a few volunteers. The city looked peaceful as they drove through the snow-covered streets, the lights from the houses twinkling like stars. Their first stop was an old apartment complex near the bridge, the same one where Lila had once lived. The hallway smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. A woman opened her door, her eyes widening when she saw the boxes of gifts. "Is this for us?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. Lila nodded eagerly. "For everyone here," she said. "Merry Christmas." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "God bless you, child." As they moved from building to building, laughter and gratitude followed them. Elijah handed out candy canes, and Lila helped the smaller children unwrap toys. Nathaniel stayed mostly in the background, watching, his chest full of something too deep for words. He realized that for the first time in years, Christmas no longer felt empty, it felt alive. When they finally returned to the clinic, exhausted but happy, the clock was nearing midnight. Snow had piled thick along the sidewalks, and the streets were quiet again. Lila carried the last box inside and placed it under the small tree in the lobby. "For anyone who comes tomorrow," she said softly. Nathaniel nodded. "You have done something incredible." She looked up at him, her expression gentle. "We all did, together." Her mother smiled from the doorway. "You know, Nathaniel," she said, "you gave this city a gift. You gave it back its heart." He looked around the room, the soft glow of lights, the reflection of snow through the window, the sound of the wind chimes swaying above the door. "No," he said quietly. "She did." Lila tilted her head. "We did it because you listened." He smiled at her, feeling that familiar ache of pride and love. The power flickered once, and for a moment, the entire room was illuminated by candlelight. Lila stepped closer to the window, watching the snow fall. "It looks just like the first time we met," she said. "Do you remember?" "I remember every second," he said. "You were counting pennies, and I was counting excuses." She giggled softly. "You do not count excuses anymore." "No," he said, "only blessings." The clock chimed midnight, marking the arrival of Christmas. Outside, the city seemed to hold its breath. Lila turned from the window and said, "Merry Christmas, mister." "Merry Christmas, Lila," he replied. For a long moment, they stood there in the quiet glow of the clinic, the man who had once been lost in wealth and the girl who had taught him what it meant to be rich. The snow kept falling, soft and endless, as the wind chime sang its gentle song into the night, echoing through the halls of the clinic that hope had built. The days after Christmas brought a calm that settled gently over the city. Snow still blanketed the rooftops, glittering under the pale sunlight, and the streets carried that rare silence that comes after joy. The clinic returned to its rhythm, but something inside its walls had shifted. People came not only for medicine but to share their stories, to bring small gifts, to thank the team who had turned kindness into a habit. Nathaniel noticed that even strangers smiled at one another more often now. The Lila Hope Community Health Center had become a heartbeat of its own, steady and warm. Lila spent most of her days helping in the reading corner, surrounded by children who loved her stories. She had started a new project, a small newsletter called The Promise Journal. It was handwritten and photocopied each week, filled with short stories, poems, and little messages from patients and volunteers. It is for everyone who needs to remember that they matter, she told Nathaniel. He had one framed copy hanging in his office, right beside the drawing she had given him the year before. One morning, she burst into his office again, waving a new issue of the journal. "We got our first letter from someone far away," she said excitedly. "From another city." He looked at the envelope, smiling. "What does it say?" She read aloud. "Dear Lila, my name is Mrs. Johnson. My granddaughter was sick, and someone sent us your story about the little girl in the clinic. It gave us hope when we had none left. Thank you for reminding us that good people still exist." Her eyes sparkled as she finished reading. She said, "Good people still exist, mister. That means us." He nodded slowly, his voice soft. "It means you, Lila." The winter stretched on, and with it came moments that tested their strength. One evening, a heavy snowstorm swept through the city, knocking out power lines and closing roads. The clinic became a shelter once again, just as it had in the early days. Families crowded the lobby, wrapped in blankets, sharing soup and stories while the staff worked by candlelight. Lila walked among them, handing out cups of warm tea. "We will be okay," she said to each person she passed. "We have light even when it is dark." Her words comforted them more than the heat from the small generator. Nathaniel watched her move through the room, her small shadow flickering against the walls, and he thought that perhaps she was right. The light did not come from the lamps or the power, it came from her. When the storm finally passed, the city emerged from the snow stronger than before. A week later, Nathaniel received an invitation from the city council asking him to speak at a conference about community rebuilding. He agreed on one condition: that Lila would join him. "I am not good at speeches," she said nervously. "You are better at truth than anyone I know," he told her. On the day of the conference, the auditorium was filled with leaders, doctors, and philanthropists. Nathaniel spoke first, telling the story of how the clinic began, of promises made and kept, of the lessons learned from a little girl's courage. Then he stepped aside, and Lila took the microphone. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice was clear. "A long time ago," she began, "I went to buy medicine for my brother with just a handful of coins. Someone laughed at me, but someone else helped me. I learned that day that kindness can change everything. Now, I get to help people too. I am not rich or famous, but I know that if you care about someone, you are already making the world better." The room was silent for a long moment, and then applause broke out loud, full, and lasting. Nathaniel stood behind her, his eyes glistening. "You did it," he whispered. "You reminded them." "Reminded them of what?" she asked softly. "That hope is contagious," he said. After the event, reporters asked to take their picture. Lila stood beside him, holding one of the promised journals. The photograph appeared in the local paper the next morning, under the headline, "The Girl Who Taught a Billionaire How to Care." When Lila saw it, she laughed so hard she nearly spilled her cocoa. "They made you sound like my student," she said. Nathaniel smiled. "That is exactly what I am." Spring came soon after, bringing with it the smell of rain and the promise of new beginnings. The clinic's garden bloomed again, and the maple tree stretched its branches high above the bench. One afternoon, as they sat together under its shade, Lila looked up at the sky and said, "Mister, I think people are like trees." "How so?" he asked. "We grow from the ground we are given, but the ones who survive are the ones who share their shade." He nodded, deeply moved. "You have shared yours with the whole world, Lila." She smiled, resting her chin in her hands. "Maybe, but I think you planted the seed." The wind chime above the clinic door swayed gently in the breeze, its familiar melody ringing through the warm air. And for Nathaniel, that sound would always mean one thing: life, second chances, and a little girl who had once turned his world from marble and glass into something far more human. Years passed quietly, as years often do when they are filled with purpose. The city continued to grow around the Lila Hope Community Health Center, but the heart of the place never changed. The maple tree by the bench grew taller, its roots deep and strong, just like the legacy that had taken hold there. The wind chime still hung above the door, its soft sound marking time like a heartbeat that refused to fade. Nathaniel had grown older, his hair grayer, his steps slower, but his spirit was lighter than it had ever been in his younger, richer years. The clinic thrived, expanding into new neighborhoods and reaching people far beyond the city, each branch carrying a small plaque that read, "The promise never ends." Lila, no longer a little girl, had become a young woman with the same bright eyes and determined heart. She had graduated from school with honors and was preparing to study medicine, though she still spent most of her time at the clinic. To everyone who met her, she was a symbol of what hope looked like when it was nurtured. On a golden afternoon, Nathaniel sat on the familiar bench beneath the maple tree, watching as Lila led a group of younger volunteers in the garden. They were planting new flowers, laughing as the wind scattered petals across the dirt. He smiled, remembering a time when she could barely reach the counter in the pharmacy. And now she was teaching others how to heal the world. Lila noticed him watching and walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. "You should rest, mister," she said kindly. "You have been working all morning." He chuckled softly. "Old habits. Good habits," she corrected. "But even good hearts need a break." She sat beside him, handing him a bottle of water. For a while, they watched the volunteers together in peaceful silence. "You know," she said quietly, "sometimes I still think about that day. The pharmacy, the coins, everything. It feels like it happened to another person." "It happened to both of us," he said gently. "It changed everything." She looked at him, her eyes shining in the afternoon light. "I never got to ask you something. Why did you help me that day? You did not even know me." He took a deep breath, looking toward the horizon. "Because you looked at me like I was someone who could do better, and I wanted to be that person." She smiled softly, the kind of smile that carried both gratitude and understanding. "You did more than better, mister. You changed the way people see kindness." He shook his head slowly. "No, Lila, you did. I just followed your lead." The sound of the wind chime drifted through the air again, mingling with the laughter of the children nearby. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked. He nodded. "All the time. But I am not afraid of what is next. Not anymore. Because I know this, what we built here will keep growing. You will keep it alive." She reached out and held his hand, small and steady just as it had been years ago, when she had led him through his first act of true compassion. "We built it together," she said, "and I will never stop." As the sun began to set, the clinic lights flickered on one by one, glowing softly against the deepening blue of the sky. Families arrived for evening checkups, volunteers carried supplies inside, and the sounds of life filled the air. Voices, footsteps, laughter. It was the sound of community, of something real. Nathaniel stood slowly, his gaze lingering on the building. "You know," he said, "when I was young, I thought success meant reaching higher than everyone else. Now I know it means lifting others up." Lila smiled at him, her eyes full of quiet pride. "You lifted a whole city, mister." "No," he said. "You reminded it how to care." That night, as the last visitors left and the clinic settled into calm, Nathaniel took one last walk through the halls. Every corner told a story: the photo of the first mobile van, the framed article about the conference, the drawings children had made over the years. At the front desk, the old wind chime swayed gently in the cool breeze from the door. He reached up and touched it lightly, closing his eyes as its familiar sound filled the room. "Thank you," he whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to everything that had brought him here: the laughter, the tears, the second chances. Outside, the stars shimmered above the city, and he sat once more under the maple tree, looking toward the glowing clinic sign. Lila joined him a moment later, holding 2 cups of cocoa just like she had on so many nights before. "You are thinking again," she said playfully. "Always," he replied. "But this time, I am thinking how lucky I am." "We both are," she said. They sat together in silence as snow began to fall again, soft and quiet, wrapping the world in peace. The camera of life seemed to pull back, then revealing the small clinic, the city that had learned to love again, and 2 people whose paths had once crossed by chance but changed the world by choice. And as the wind chime sang its final note into the night, the story of the little black girl and the billionaire came full circle, not with wealth or grandeur, but with the simple truth they had discovered together: kindness once given never ends.